leave with something. So I wish more people would lean into this idea of entrepreneurship while they are on their way to becoming entrepreneurs, or even if they have no desire to ever be an entrepreneur, create something within that organization, create a project, create an annual something that is yours. Your name is on it. People know that your name is on it, and you can essentially leave with.
Welcome back to Impostrix Podcast. My name is Whitney Knox Lee, and I'm your host. This is season 3 of Impostrix Podcast, where we are focusing on validating small business owners of color, entrepreneurs, and folks who unfortunately are navigating employment discrimination in their workplace. Impostrix Podcast always puts folks of color first. So all of our guests are people of color who are sharing about their personal experience or their learned experience. So buckle up, let's go. Welcome back to Impostrix Podcast. My name is Whitney Knox Lee. I'm your host, and I am here with Joia Thornton. Joia is a past colleague of mine, a friend. She is someone that I look up to as just a woman doing her thing out there in the world, living her best life. She is an advocate. I'm going to let you talk about yourself a little bit, Joia. But I look forward to this conversation. It's actually a long time in the making. We've been talking about recording this episode for probably a year, maybe. Well, I guess maybe a little less than a
Yeah,
year.
yeah, I think about a year.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm excited. I know you guys are gonna love her. So Joya, tell us about yourself. Who are you, and what identities are you bringing to this space?
Sure. So, hello, everybody. I am eager. I'm excited. And Whitney, I'm proud of you. So, I'm going to pause and just say, I'm so proud of you. Always send good energy to you. I definitely can see this show going on the road and being on the national stage. So, I thank you for designing this space for people to come and talk about who they are and what they've done and the paths that they've forged in the world. So I am Joia Aaron Thornton. I'm from Memphis, Tennessee, by way of New Orleans. I always like to say both of those things because that is where both of my identities were shaped as a child and also as an adult. I am an organizer, I'm a storyteller professionally. I am a lobbyist. I am a policy strategist. And I just love to tell the stories of people who are underserved, who are marginalized, may have adverse childhood experiences, to really show the depths of the social determinants that create where people land in their lives. And that's really what it's all about. It's not because somebody's been dealt a bad hand or somebody's been dealt a good hand. It's really about just kind of, the environments that we place essentially children in, and the environments that once we become adults that we choose to enter and to occupy. So that makes me feel really good. I am a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm an auntie. My mom is she was in the school system for 38 years as an administrator, a teacher. My dad, he is by trade a chef, but he is a pastor. He's a pastor of a Baptist church. So I was a preacher and a teacher's kid. Like, go figure. Um, the magnifying glass was definitely always on me. But I really like that my parents, of course, they prayed over me to be a change agent in this world. I had one of those mamas that came in with oil while we were asleep and was like, "You're gonna be something in this world." Which, and I
That's so
definitely thank
funny.
her. Yeah, I definitely thank her for that. It was, kind of uncomfortable at times, waking up with oil in your face, but I definitely thank her and my dad for allowing us to be, and not feeling like, even though with their titles, that we had to measure up or live up to something or some idea that others created of ourselves. So,
Mm.
in a nutshell, that is my background.
Yeah, and what a legacy, that your parents instill in you and that they, exist in this world with as, particularly in the Black community,
Right.
teachers and faith leaders are pillars, of our community and thinking about how faith has supported people of color,
Oh yeah.
throughout our hardships, throughout our
Mm,
oppression, and thinking about how valuable education has been. Education is so valuable that they used to kill Black people when they
mm,
learned how to read.
right.
Um, and so just thinking about your parents and that generation of, carrying on, in those 2 traditions, and it makes a lot of sense now because I know you, of course. You make a lot of sense to me,
Mm,
and I see how those legacies of your parents and their traditions have filtered into your
yeah.
work as executive director of Flock. So tell us about Flock.
I am so excited about Flock. We're going to talk a little bit about how Flock came to pass, but Flock essentially is a policy organization. It's a nonprofit that extends the access of policy information, execution information, and also advocacy around the elimination of capital punishment directly to Black and Indigenous clergy. So this can be pastors, bishops, overseers. This can also be like divinity school professors, seminarians, leaders of nonprofits that are faith based. It leverages that power. Like the Black church, especially in red states, really they need to reclaim. Like Maxine Waters, you need to reclaim that time. You need to reclaim that power that you have in many state general assemblies. You're talking about a president like President Biden who leans heavily into the opinions of Black pastors. So, what Flock does is create a vehicle for pastors to learn about policy information in regards to capital punishment on a state level and also on a federal level, and be able to advocate and say, not in my name. Capital punishment is a system, as we know, Whitney, in our work. It does not deter crime. It is extremely expensive. We've had over 190 exonerations from death row. And it's one of those public policy systems that really fails victims, families, and the larger community. So there is no other answer other than to eliminate its use and find alternatives to hold people accountable and keep our community safe from violent crime. So Flock it started off as just 21 people in June of 2021 and now has grown to over 350 people within its core community.
Wow. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
That's amazing. And when Joya and I were working together, periodically, Joya was the person that would keep us up to date on pending executions and also whether or not a stay of an execution was
Right.
granted. And we would learn about the work that Joya was doing with families and communities of people on death row. And it's really important work, and I admire it a lot. So thank you for that. So today we are going to
Yes.
talk about Blackness at work, but specifically, we are going to talk about navigating harm that we experience from other Black people. Joya and I have both had experience with this, and we talk a lot on this podcast about healing, and we talk about racial trauma. We talk about racial toxicity. Um, and a lot of the times, I think when people come to this show, they expect that we're going to be talking about white people and whiteness. And yes, sometimes we do. But I hope for regular listeners, what is becoming more and more apparent to you is that although, yes, we experience oppression, from white people and communities, and we experience white supremacy, and that means a whole lot of things depending on which kind of space you are occupying. We also acknowledge that white supremacy doesn't need white people. And a lot of us, we all have internalized white supremacy, which means sometimes we act in ways that are not conducive to our liberation as people of color or as a people. And so, yes, that happens. That happens in the workplace. That happens with our Black colleagues. Um, and so that's what we're going to talk about today is how we work through those moments, those relationships that we have with our colleagues that are not good relationships. Um, and, for me, it included grieving, a grieving process of what I thought was, what I hoped was to be, um, and realizing that it wasn't to be, that the people weren't who I thought they were, or that our relationship wasn't what I thought it was. Um, but so, Joya, I'll ask you, we say sometimes in the community that like all Black folk ain't kinfolk, which means just because we share skin color range, doesn't mean that we have the same beliefs, the same politics, the same ideas around respect, the same values. Um, and as a result, we find ourselves thrown under the bus sometimes by the very people that we think are supposed to be, having our back. And so I wonder if you'd like to share a little bit about how you've dealt with this situation.
Oh, Whitney, that was a lot. And preparing for this call, preparing for our podcast, I have a lot of thoughts down here. So if you see me looking down, it's because I had to organize these thoughts to be able to connect with the audience and hopefully for them to extract something out that is useful. But something that I wrote down that I wanted to begin with is Black people. Black people are sometimes often the first ones to metaphorically lynch each other in an attempt to save institutions that we did not build and we do not own. I wanted to set the tone with that because that's so important. When you talk about this idea of being imposters in
Mhm.
environments where we are the only Black or one of two Black, or we didn't create the institution that probably is now occupied by more Black people, but it still has that lingering white supremacist feeling or values or even board. It is an attempt to save the institution instead of saving yourself. And I
Mm.
wanted more people to be aware of that because even when you and I were kind of talking and supporting each other, and as I have supported other women who went through things similar, the most important thing is for you to save yourself. We are so
Mm.
smart. We are so brilliant as Black women. There's this thing that I'm hearing like in my head when it's like Black women will save the world. We are the secret sauce. And I just wish more people, more Black women would understand that when we enter into these institutions. We are there because we bring something different. We bring a flair. We bring a cultural competency that maybe the institution did not have. And so it's important that we understand that we have to save ourselves. We have to save our minds. We have to save our mental health. We have to save our physical bodies from having all these migraines.
Mhm.
Um, that those are the things that are important when we are going through conflict, when we feel like we are negotiating our worth with anyone. We have to lean into self preservation over saving an institution. And that's really kind of like the baseline that I want folks to understand when they're going through this type of turbulence in their office. Like, what are we saving? Like, what are we
Right,
saving here? Are we
right.
saving my title? Because you have the creativity to relocate, transition, and create your own title, as both of us have done, and a title that is probably higher than what you have. I think it's just this fear, this fear of like the unknown, right? What do I do next?
Right.
And it kind of baffles me, Whitney, because we as black women, and when you talk about black women and education, and as you can tell, like I'm a social media person, so I always think of like memes, like when black women get bored, we're like, okay, let's get another degree. We are so brilliant and creative, where we literally we can create environments that are more conducive to the way we think and the way we move, but we just have a fear to remain loyal to institutions that we feel are paying us, or as our parents say, giving us those good incentives and benefits, right?
Right, right.
But yeah, I definitely wanted to bring that to light and have folks kind of ponder on those types of ideas.
Yeah, and I know for me, it's particularly difficult, harmful,
Mhm.
painful when the conflict that I'm experiencing is with another Black person, specifically with a Black woman. Um, because I mean, there's lots of reasons, right? Like, 1, I consider you a part of my community simply because you're Black. 2, we're both Black women. Maybe we have had similar experiences in a career, in a profession that is 4.9% Black women, or Black people, not even Black women. Um, 3, I've got my own baggage around not being accepted by Black people, around feeling like an imposter in Black communities. And so now feeling the divide between us because of, whatever the issues, interpersonal issues, really, um, triggers some of that. And so, it is for me, it took months for me to realize that I was having to question whether I'm gonna lean into self-preservation or whether I'm gonna lean into sacrifice for the sake of, the organization. Um, and I'll say this mindset of, well, 1, wanting to save the or wanting to sacrifice for the organization. What you had said at the beginning, of, we don't have ownership in these organizations. Um Period. And that's true of capitalism for the most part. There are very few people who actually have ownership of these organizations that we're working with. Most of them are not Black, most of them are not women, and, in order to get to that status, that involves really climbing over other people. That is how capitalism works, that's how racial capitalism works, white supremacy made it that way. And so my realization was around I'm just a number in this organization. Like I'm just a they will replace me. Like they are not as dedicated and committed to me as I am to them. And that was hurtful. That was a hurtful realization for me. Um because of who I am, because of my value, because I want to feel like I own my labor. Um But then this realization that I don't own my labor. Somebody else owns my labor. Um, but then secondly, what you said about Black people, we will lynch our own. And what that reminds me of is this scarcity mindset, the scarcity mentality that we have that's been so deeply ingrained in us. Um, from, pre-United States times when we were brought over as enslaved persons. It was either you're gonna be a house slave or you're gonna be in the field. Like, and there's competition regarding who's gonna be in the house and who's gonna be in the field. There's competition always regarding who's gonna have the better role, the safer role, the role where maybe you get a longer lunch break, the role where maybe you get medical care versus the roles that you don't. And today, this class system, is broken down between like, blue collar, white collar, working class, middle class, etc. Um, But the point is, what we are taught as Americans is that only so many people can can, make it to this space of comfort, this space of relative power, this space of success, this space of safety. And when it comes down to whether it's gonna be me or you, folks are always gonna choose themselves. Um, and that applies to our community. Um, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is a system of surviving, but when you talk about survival, you have to create your own ecosystem. Do you want to create an ecosystem where you are oppressed and seen as less human? Because whenever I go into an institution, my first ideal of myself is to assert my humanity within that institution. And I know you've heard the theory of Black women as mules. And when you think about a mule, back in like the 16, 17, 1800s, a mule just does the work of the individual. It carries the ingredients from one house to the next or one farm to the next. It really has no place other than to just carry kind of that labor. It's not seen as anything that is useful when it comes to humanity, but useful when it comes to work. So it's almost kind of like this subconscious idea when you are in a workplace and a Black woman being compared to the mule. I just have to keep the institution going. I just have to make sure that I'm policing and over policing myself. Is my hair okay? Is my body shape muted where it doesn't create a distraction? Is my tone okay? That always kind of like happens when you enter into workspaces. I know for me as a Black woman, a lot of other Black women share that same sentiment, and it has ran across your mind at one time or another, even if you are now delivered from it, like I am. Like I don't really care. I care to a certain extent of professionalism, but not to a point where I can't authentically show up as myself and who I am. But when you talked about the different class systems and how people are kind of like categorized when it comes to how they are viewed, that's the same thing when you talk about our workspace. If I have a certain title, I'm not going to let go of that title. And really, when you think about it, Whitney, sometimes that's all we're holding on to. Because when you talk about wages, and a lot of people don't work for money and salaries and stuff like that, it really is kind of like I've worked 15 years for this title, in an institution again that I don't own and that I didn't create. So that's something that I always think about. Like, are we just kind of like the mules that are
Yeah.
making this organization work, or do we have agency? Do we have stock? Are we the idea champions? And one thing I want to note, and I put down here on my notes, I've always embodied and embraced that at any company, I will be an entrepreneur. And an
Hmm.
entrepreneur is an employee that creates a project or an idea within a larger organization that is inherently owned. And I was
Mhm.
inherently your own. And I would even say patented. If there are no laws in the policy handbooks, the employee handbooks, you should always create something within an organization that you are in with their resources, with their connections, and build it and make it your own. I advocate so much for women and people just period to be entrepreneurs. My mom used to always tell me, leave your mark, leave
Right.
your mark, come away with something, you know,
Yeah. That's right.
other than your last paycheck. If you are to transition away from an institution, leave with something. So I wish more people would lean into this idea of entrepreneurship while they are on their way to becoming entrepreneurs, or even if they have no desire to ever be an entrepreneur, create something within that organization, create a project, create an annual something that is yours. Your name is on it. People know that your name is on it, and you can essentially leave with.
Yeah, I love that suggestion. That's also the type of worker that I am, and I think what it also does, particularly for women and women of color, is it does give you that notoriety within your organization. It gives you something that you own, um, that you are a leader on. It provides, like, tangible data for you to then be able to rely on if you're seeking promotion or if you're, somebody's questioning your work or whatever the case may be. Um, and also in one of my season 1 conversations, me and my guest Ruth White talked about, um, the invisible labor of women that we wind up doing a lot of, and this is also, like, non-promotable work, and that's stuff like secretarying meetings. That's stuff like making coffee for the office. It's stuff that particularly women wind up doing a lot of because we are taking maybe the roles that we've had at home in our personal lives, and we are bringing those into the office. Um, Granted, not everybody does this, but I know I certainly do. For as liberal and all the things that I am, I definitely fall within traditional gender roles, and I do those things at home, and I certainly did those things in the office, when I was going to an office. Those are ways that, like, I felt like I could contribute, to the workplace, but ways that are not gonna be recognized in a way that matters, so with money. It's not gonna be recognized with a promotion. It's
Yeah,
it's gonna be like a pat on the back, somebody grabbing their coffee and saying, "Thanks for making the coffee, Whitney," which is great, that's fine. So, you can do that, but also have a project that you own. Um, and I've done that at several of the organizations that I've worked for, and
absolutely.
it's been enjoyable too, because then you get to see your project grow that's maybe dependent or independent from, the standard programs within the organization. So yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
I Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know that that actually can happen. That can be your hope and your dream. If you are one of those people that are not as risky to go out and kind of bet on yourself, and that's okay because we're all at different points where sometimes we can't bet on us ourselves right now. We may be just graduated from college and we have to work within an institution. A lot of people don't know about that entrepreneurship that you can create within those systems. So I'm glad we talked about that.
Yeah. So we're gonna talk in a little bit down the road around creating our own professional spaces and timelines. But before we do that, I want to come back to, this conflict that we experience as Black people when the conflict is with other Black people or people of color. Um, Because it's normal. Like, I guess, like, I need to say that, like, it is normal. Um, I think
Yeah.
and I have felt so much guilt around it because of feeling like, "Okay, I shouldn't be this shouldn't be happening. We should all be getting along. Everything should be fine." And feeling like it was my fault and feeling like I don't know if my race is involved or like if I'm treating these people differently because of race. I don't think I am, but also are they treating me differently because of my race? Like there's a lot of guilt and just questioning that I experience when I'm in conflict in the workplace with Black women specifically. And that conflict really kept me quiet about and isolated about what I was experiencing for a long while. But the moment that I confided in someone, like this whole other world opened up with support, with other people at the workplace who could support me. With like, then I started seeing a Black career coach who was supporting me in just trying to figure out, like, what is my path right now? Um, And so I want to talk about how we as Black folks and other folks of color can support and protect Black people who are experiencing um, this kind of conflict in their workplaces, because it
Yeah.
is so easy for people to kind of wash their hands of it, to not want to get involved, to not want to quote take sides. And there's a lot of emotion and trauma wrapped up in it. What are your thoughts?
Whew, wow. It almost kind of feels like the Twilight Zone, right? It's so surreal when you're going through it. You're like, is this happening? Like, is this really happening? And yes, it absolutely is happening. And I think for you, Whitney, whereas you felt guilt and grief, I felt relief and power. I was ready. Because
Wow.
I've experienced those things before, and it kind of speaks to the idea and the notes that we were shuffling around when we were talking about this call of going from pet to threat. That seems to be almost the theme sometimes of my professional life. You know, I come in and they say, look at this smart Black girl. Like she's doing a lot of things. She's on time. You know, she comes to the meeting, she's involved, she's articulate, right? She's articulate. But then it shifts from this individual, she has all the qualities to take my job. She is a change agent within the organization, and she's a leader at an entry level position, right? She's a leader at an entry level position. She has the uh, power to influence other employees. Like, what is going on here? Like, what is going? Whereas a lot of other folks, and I'm not saying this is everybody, but whereas other folks will be like, oh my gosh, this is somebody we could prop up, and we can circle around and we can coach because oftentimes even if she's from pet to threat she's still coachable because the reason why she got to where she is because she's been able to receive constructive criticism and coaching. It's almost like I have to, going back to what we're saying, I have to protect this institution and I have to protect my position within this institution. It's so weird when you think about it, like as a symbol. Like if you all were on a deserted island, like instead of figuring out a way to get off of the island, you're figuring out a way to protect your side of the island because we all still want to be stranded, right? We all gonna be stranded. But if I'm gonna be stranded, this gonna be my side of the being stranded island, right?
Yes.
Versus figuring out ways to just get out and get off and realizing we are all oppressed. So for me, when I start recognizing things like that, even spiritually as a believer, I know that God is about to take me higher. Oh, and did he? Oh, and did he? With situations that I've experienced, like currently, and also situations like from my past, like even graduating from college. I've always experienced that. At first it was like a Twilight Zone, Whitney. I felt exactly like you when I was in my 20s. I was like, what's going on here? I'm just trying to be the best. I'm just trying to show up. And it's also kind of like that oldest daughter syndrome too. I,
Mm.
I'm just trying to make my family proud. I'm trying to make you, as my executive director, proud. And even though these might not be the conventional methods that other people have went to get to this goal, I see it in my head, and it's been shown and proven that this is the way that I need to go. And I just need you to support me in that. You know, have a conversation with me and pull me back when I'm going too far out, but also support creative thinking within the workplace. Sometimes it's almost kind of like that intergenerational thing. Like,
Yeah.
I'm a millennial
Yeah.
coming in to work with Gen Xers, and Gen Xers have done it that way. And I'm sure Gen Xers had that back and forth with the boomers, and I'm sure Gen Z has it with us as
Yep.
millennials, and Gen Alpha will have it with Gen Z. So it's also kind of like understanding the generations, understanding the tides changing, and the old guard really realizing that there are other ways to grow the company. So that's something that I always think about. And when you think about just historically, maintaining this system of slavery was not just maintained by white people.
Right.
It was also maintained by Black people trying to preserve this institution in an attempt to, you know, save themselves, or what they thought was saving themselves, but really was just slowly kind of killing themselves. Like, so we taking people to church today and we just trying to get them to wake up
Mm.
and realize that if you're experiencing this, now this is not to say that if you're in an organization where you are embraced, where you're able to think creatively, and you have leaders that are challenging to think alternatively, that that's not a good place for you. We're talking about people who are slowly dying and becoming shells of themselves in their 30s. It's time to really reevaluate where you need to be.
Right, right. Because of your work environment. Because that's what happens, right? Like that's what I was feeling was I am not safe to be myself. Um and there's been a couple of jobs, one job where it didn't quite go that far, but I was less invested. So it wasn't that that big of a deal for me. Um
But that's the key. We have to be less invested. We have to be more invested in ourselves
yeah.
and less invested in these institutions that we are adding to and creating color to, right?
Hmm. And this is
We have
coming
to.
from I was just gonna say, this is coming from 2, like, lifetime nonprofit advocates, like, because that's the other thing. In our line of work, it is about sacrificing our whole self for the work. Um, and, millennials, again, are moving away from that. Gen Z is moving far away from that. Um, And that can be a huge disconnect in a workplace that is multi-generational, because what it means is myself as a millennial may have boundaries that a Gen Xer may not have. And then there's a disconnect between commitment to work, and between, passion for the work and all of the things, which can exacerbate the problems. And so yeah, I mean, investing in myself is something that I didn't learn from my parents as far as, like, how I interacted in the workplace. Um, there was no roadmap for how do you do a hard, emotionally taxing, and laborious career, and, like, be okay. There was no roadmap for that. Um,
Can I touch on that a little bit?
yeah.
Because we're in Atlanta right now, and in Atlanta, this is a voting season for us. Folks are voting on DA and sheriff and things like that here in Atlanta. We always talk about, our ancestors wish that they could have voted, and they wish they could have lived in the areas and went to school in the areas that we have done. But we often don't talk about rest. We don't talk about rest. We don't talk about imagination. We don't talk about creating a dream space. And a lot of this language I'm taking directly from Rest is Resistance,
Mhm.
with Trisha Hersey. And she talks about that. And when you think about slaves, and if we were to go back in time, and as we are descendants of slaves, if we were to ask someone in that period of time, when they have just finished from can't see at morning to can't see at night, what is something you desire right now? I bet you that they would say rest.
Mm.
Their first answer wouldn't be voting, even though voting is important. It wouldn't be living in a gated community. It
Yeah.
would be rest. And that's something that, Whitney and I, we talked about that when we were in our book club. Like, rest is resistance, and you have to understand when is your time to rest. There are many employers now that have mental health days, and a lot of Black employees, for this desire to continue to show up,
Mhm.
don't take those days. And I remember my mom telling me that they had like a teachers meeting on Wednesdays. My educators know this in secondary education, and there was a big blow up in one of the meetings, and one of her white female colleagues was out for 2 days. And this was like in the mid 90s when she was teaching middle school, and mental health days wasn't even thought of. But her white female colleague was like, I need to gather myself after this blow up in our teachers meeting, and I'm not present, and I'm not going to be physically present because I'm also not mentally present. And that's just something that I often think about, that we work ourselves to death. I had a friend in Memphis. She dropped and had a stroke at the age of like 37 because she was juggling so many titles. She has so much responsibility. She was always on, right? It's this need. We always have to be on. Even at Chick-fil-A. My name is Joia. I have to be on.
Even
I
at Chick.
encourage our listeners, make up a fake name. Like, be fun. Do something fun. Don't always, be on. So it's important that we understand when to rest, when to self-preserve ourselves, because like we mentioned before, like in a situation like organizations, nonprofit, and even in the corporate world, you are replaceable. If it's not yours, you're replaceable from the
Mm-hmm.
top to the bottom. I just talked to my friend in tech, and there were some layoffs that happened in Spotify a couple of years ago, when all the folks were running to tech. Like, you have to preserve yourself. You are the secret sauce.
Yeah. This, it really makes me think about a lot because, of course, Black folks and other folks of color, we spent our whole lives learning that we had to do twice as much, that we had to work twice as hard. And so to reel that back now in our working lives, in adulthood, um, even in our social lives, we be doing all the things. We be networking to the end. We gonna shut the place
Yeah.
down for the in the name of networking. Um,
In the
and
name of networking. That's so funny.
right, to roll it back is something that we have to learn. Like, we have to unlearn what we thought we knew and then learn something else. And it is it is difficult. It's difficult to take mental health days. Sometimes, well, not for me. Shoot, I will take a mental health day. But I have friends who are like, I can't take a mental health day because blah 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 blah. I'll fall behind, or people will think that I don't want to be at work, or that I'm not committed, or my mental, like, it's not that bad. I don't really need to rest. I'm just frustrated right now. Like, there's all sorts of things that we could tell ourselves to not rest. And one of the ways that my colleagues had been really supportive of me was to encourage that rest, to encourage when I was having tough conversations, that left
I
me
was
in
one of the
tears.
colleagues, everybody. I was
Sure
one of the
was, sure was. Colleagues were telling me, go home, and just rest, Um, and I think it's so important for us to be able to support each other in that way, to not only, like, validate people, but also encourage people to take care of themselves and, like, suggest ideas for how to do that and be accountable to each other for how we're gonna care for ourselves.
Absolutely. And I just want to lightly touch on when we talked about sometimes your oppressor, the people that are creating like uncomfortable spaces can be Black. We also need to identify that and accept that, even though it's a harsh reality. When you're talking about being on the workplace, you may have unlikely allies that may not be Black. You may not always connect with individuals who you feel aesthetically should connect with you. In my case, I have funders that didn't have my skin color that came to me and say, "We're going to support you in this. If you want to jump out, we're going to have that safety net for you." And I'm so glad I opened my mind up to that, and I didn't have as much loyalty to race, even though I speak about race a lot when it comes to my experiences. But I was open enough to understand that I have support in other spaces. And even though I may look at someone and feel that I can identify with them and may not be able to always identify with them. And that also speaks to like ethnicity and cultural background too, because I don't know if I shared this with you, Whitney. I have a multi-racial background. My dad's biracial. Like I have several different cultural experiences that embody me, and maybe that's the reason why I don't always connect sometimes in all Black spaces. Definitely a champion for Black people, but we definitely need to acknowledge that and accept that, and also, and I'll take it a step further, give that individual grace because they may not be at the point where they are understanding what they're doing to you. And I think if you are an evolved person and evolving in your thinking, you have to realize this person might not even know what they're doing to me. So even though I'm hurt right now, I'm going to extend them grace to grow beyond this point that they are at now.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that because also the fact of the matter is I have harmed people, not knowing, not intending
Absolutely.
to.
Me too.
Right, and so this isn't I mean, it's not like a good person, bad person. It's we are people, and these are some of the
Right.
dynamics that people navigate, and it can be difficult and it can be harmful. And what this requires is a lot of self-reflection. And that's like my job. It's not for me to tell Joia, you need to go think about yourself. Like, no, it's for me to reflect on how I'm showing up in the workplace, and everything else that's happening around me, how people are treating me and all that stuff is their problem. Now I can have boundaries, I can advocate for myself and all of those things, but that's them and I don't have control over them.
Yeah, and one of my favorite scriptures is to strive to live in peace with everyone.
Mm,
Like we're going to have some uncomfortable conversations. There are going to be some incidences that arise in our life. But if you can strive to live in peace with someone, if it's a kind word you can send someone's way, strive to do that. You
mhm.
just never know what bridges you may cross. And in turn, you may not know when you may need someone's help, or they may not know when they need your help. We have all heard this. But if you can just strive to live in peace, it doesn't mean that y'all gonna go to each other's birthday dinners, your kids' baby showers,
Nope.
but just to strive to live and depart in peace.
Yeah. Thank you. So I want to move into that final question around creating our own professional spaces. And so Joya and I have both done that. And it has been an amazing journey for me, but I'm really interested to hear, Joya, about Flock and what has become of that in the time that you've now had to own this project.
Yeah, so Flock has been operating independently for 10 months. We gained our fiscal sponsor in August of 2023. Wonderful fiscal sponsor. So, if anyone is out there looking for a fiscal sponsor, I'll be happy to suggest that later on. But yeah, Flock began in 2021 under the umbrella of another organization, and through that, we were able to kind of brand our identity, gain the connections that we have right now. But I'm just so proud of how Flock has grown, the cases that we've been involved in, Julius Jones, now Tremaine Wood. I got my start doing faith and justice work in Memphis, Tennessee, at an organization by the name of Just City. Worked on the Purvis Payne campaign. Purvis Payne was the individual who was able to help us change the Tennessee intellectual disabilities law. So now we can prosecute, not prosecutors, but defense attorneys can bring forth judicial review in regards to if their client has an intellectual disability, and it's not so hard and clear cut as it is in Georgia, and Georgia still needs to lower that burden of proof. Um, so that case was very pivotal because I was able to work with the Church of God in Christ, the Progressive National Baptist Convention, and other larger faith institutions to bring attention to Purpose Payne, who was a Black man in 1987 accused of killing a victim, Cherie Scott, and her daughter. And there was evidence, a culpable amount of evidence to show that he was not the individual to actually commit those crimes. So from that, that was kind of like a baseline for my faith and justice work. Faith and justice is me. I come from a family of leaders. I was first introduced to advocacy by my mother during the 1990s, during the South African apartheid. Me and my sister at 3 and 4 years old had shirts that said "Cry Freedom." So that was my first entryway into how people were treated and how we needed to speak up for people. Like I said, Flock has now grown into a community. And when I say core community, this is the clergy community of 350 people in 3 years.
Wow.
The extended community, our listserv, we have 500 people. So these are the people that are kind of like our allies, our experts. They may not fit the demographic of Flock, but they definitely support us. And Flock just came from the White House.
Woo! That
Block
is
had,
amazing.
yeah, Block was at the White House. We met with the Office of Public Engagement. We met with the Department of Justice, the Pardons Attorney's Office, to really talk about our feelings about the federal death row. And we really wanted to put that private pressure on individuals to say these pastors who represent thousands of people in their conventions are concerned about the federal death row and how we do the death penalty in states. So from that, we've gained so many supporters because our train is
Wow.
in motion. Our train is in
Yeah.
motion, and a lot of federal connections within just 3 years. So that's why I know that this is a God thing. That's why I know that everything that I went through was for this, because right now I have people that I never would have dreamed of calling on me to collaborate privately on policy issues.
Yeah. Just yesterday, I was recording another episode for the season, with someone, and we talked about that she was fired. She was let go from her job, and how
Mhm.
much shame that caused her, but
Oh, that's a
how
blessing.
often. Right. But how often it happens, but also how little we talk about it. Like, we go through getting fired alone and in secrecy. And getting fired allowed her to start this amazing venture, that is helping the world. And, she said the word something like, I know without a doubt that I'm living within my purpose. Like, I know what my purpose is on this earth now, thanks to like that chain of events, and what she had created since then. And so I say that because so many of us are experiencing moments in our workplace where we are seriously considering leaving, or where maybe we are going to be fired, or let go, if we want to put it nicely, or maybe it's just too toxic for us to continue to be there, and we're waiting for the next thing, which is smart because it's not a employees market right now. Like, it's hard to find a job, so I'm not trying to just go tell people to quit their jobs, but what I am saying is be open to the opportunities that lie ahead if you are somebody who's in that position of needing to make a transition soon.
Yeah, and I advocate for multiple streams of income. Period. We are just too creative of a people, and this is a black white. We're just creative people individually. So even though we take pride in our jobs and we leave our universities and we're excited to obtain these jobs, you are creative enough to create your own income and generate your own income. And just think about ways to package it. You keep mentioning your career coach, and I think that that's a really good idea. for everyone to have. We have therapists, we have doctors. A career coach is just not a bad idea when you're thinking about how can I continue to generate and brand myself as an individual? How can I create speaking opportunities for myself? That can be packaged as well. What book can I write? What article can I write? Some people think that they have to write a book to start a speaking tour. You literally can just write an article, and
Yep.
then tour with that piece of information. And someone may want to develop that article or their journal into a book. So I always say, just think of other ways that you can make money. And the stigma around being fired or being let go, and so thank you.
Right.
What I always do sometimes is write a letter to yourself if you're dealing with something
Mm.
that makes you feel like I'm gonna be let go or fired or whatever, or I have to leave abruptly. Write a letter and say something along the lines of, "Thank you." Write your own letter so you can take that power back. And whenever that does happen, or they feel like they are letting you go, send a letter back to them.
Mm.
They don't always have to send a letter to you and say, "We're letting you go." And and I also let you go as well. Let it be mutual. Maybe
Yeah.
that's my Capricorn petty side, but you send a letter back to them. Send a letter back to them, because often sometimes they will create like these little exit interviews
Yeah.
instead of in lieu of an exit interview, right? Send a
Mhm.
letter and say thank you for everything. This environment is not conducive to me. So I am
Mhm.
so glad that you did that.
Yeah.
So that's something that I
I
also
love
kind of
that.
say with remove that stigma, remove that shame. And here's my letter to you. So
Mm. Thank you, Joya.
Whitney, you
I
know
like
me.
that
So
tip. Yeah, I like that tip. So, Joya, where can folks find you?
sure, definitely I would love for everyone to follow me, of course, on Instagram at Joia and ATL. But as far as with Block is on all social media platforms. We have a website, blockjustice.org. Flock Justice on Twitter or X, Flock Justice also on Instagram, and Flock Justice on Facebook. So if you are a faith leader, if you're connected to Black and Indigenous faith leaders, I would love to connect with you. I would love to have a one-on-one with you and for you to join our community because we're doing a lot of great things.
Thank you. And flock is spelled FLOCC.
FLOCC, justice.org.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Joya, for joining us on Impostrix Podcast. Thank you so much for listening to Impostrix Podcast. I appreciate your support and that you continue to listen week after week after week. I've got some exciting news, which is that you can now listen and support Impostrix Podcast on the Alive Podcast Network app. You will find ad-free listening to nearly 100 other Black-hosted podcasts, in addition to Impostrix Podcast, and you'll be able to support those podcasts and really kind of get into your groove with that app. I hope that you will join me over there. I appreciate your support. To connect with me, feel free to join me on Instagram at Impostrix Podcast. You can also join me on Facebook in our validating space. Just search for Impostrix Podcast. All right, until next time, be validated.